With piercing eyes, firm voice, and a nation standing behind him, Ibrahim Traoré stood before a hall of journalists and uttered the words that would echo across the continent. To my elder in Nigeria, President Tinubu. If your democracy truly feeds your people, guards their dignity, and secures their lives, protect it. But do not insult our struggles simply because we did not ask your permission to fight for ours. And just like that, a new chapter in Africa's story was opened. Bold, defiant, unapologetically African. This wasn't just a reply. This was a reckoning. A message from the young soldier turned president to the old guard of African politics. A line drawn in the Sahelian sand. Because when Nigeria's President Bola Ahmed Tinubu criticized what he called immature governments masquerading as reformers, no one needed a translator to understand who he was pointing at. The implication was clear. The warning was public. And the backlash, inevitable. Burkina Faso, long seen as one of Africa's poorest and most volatile nations, was now speaking back. Not just to France. Not just to ECOWAS. But to Nigeria, Africa's giant. And the man doing the talking wasn't dressed in a suit, wasn't schooled in Washington or Paris. He was Ibrahim Traoré. A revolutionary in every sense. But how did we get here? How did a 35-year-old military captain become the voice challenging Africa's most powerful political machinery? And more importantly, what does this clash between Traoré and Tinubu mean for the future of the continent? To answer that, we must rewind the clock, look beneath the headlines, and understand the forces shaping today's African power struggle. It all started at the ECOWAS Emergency Summit in Abuja. President Tinubu, then the newly appointed chairman of the bloc, took to the podium with a stern message. He called for the restoration of democratic rule in countries that had abandoned the ballot for the barrel. He warned against what he described as a dangerous flirtation with militarism disguised as patriotism. And he insisted that West Africa's stability relied on civilian governance, elections, and adherence to international norms. To many listening, it sounded noble. But to others, particularly in the Sahel, it felt hypocritical. Because while Tinubu spoke of democracy, many in his own country were still reeling from allegations of electoral malpractice. While he praised democratic norms, millions of Nigerians questioned whether their votes had ever truly mattered. And while he warned against coups, he stood atop a system that had, for decades, failed to deliver the basic needs of its people. So when Tinubu criticized Traoré, he didn't just provoke a political reaction, he lit a cultural firestorm. This wasn't about elections versus military rule. It was about two visions for Africa. On one hand, the polished halls of Abuja, Accra, and Dakar, still tied to old alliances, still dependent on Western aid, still operating under rules written outside the continent. On the other, the dusty streets of Ouagadougou, Bamako, and Niamey, where soldiers now lead, foreign bases are expelled, and the cry of Africa First echoes louder each day. Ibrahim Traoré represents that second current. He didn't rise through parliament. He didn't wine and dine with lobbyists. He came up through the ranks of an army that had been neglected, in a nation that had been terrorized, under governments that had done little. When he seized power in 2022, he didn't promise comfort. He promised confrontation. Not with the people, but with the systems that kept them down. He expelled French troops. He shut down pro-Western media. He rejected offers of aid that came with strings attached. He looked east to Russia and other non-Western partners. And most controversially, he called for African leaders to stop being managers of Western interests and start becoming defenders of African dignity. That message resonated not just in Burkina Faso, but in Mali, Niger, Chad, Guinea, and even far-off corners of South Africa. For some, Traoré became a symbol of dangerous populism. But for millions of young Africans, he became something more: hope. So when Tinubu's comments surfaced, it wasn't just Ibrahim Traoré who felt attacked. It was a generation. A generation tired of false democracies. Tired of foreign armies protecting foreign interests. Tired of poverty amid resource wealth. Tired of watching presidents shake hands with France while their citizens eat dust. Traoré knew this. That's why his response was not just personal, it was continental. He said, the legitimacy of power must come from the people. Not the ballot boxes alone, but the hearts and minds of those who suffer daily. If my people no longer believe in me, I will leave power myself. But until then, I will not be lectured by men who confuse elections with justice. That single line exploded across social media. Pan-African influencers, students, activists, even opposition leaders in other countries began quoting him. In Ghana, a youth-led protest carried banners that read, "Africa is not your colony." In Senegal, students chanted his name during demonstrations against government crackdowns. Even in Nigeria, some began questioning why Tinubu was more concerned about Burkina Faso than fixing insecurity in the north or poverty in Lagos. But here's what makes this moment historic: this wasn't just about two presidents disagreeing. This was about Africa confronting its identity crisis. Can we chart our own path without mimicking Western systems? Can we value community-based leadership over foreign-sanctioned institutions? Can we admit that democracy, when corrupted, can be as dangerous as dictatorship? Ibrahim Traoré doesn't claim to have all the answers. But he is asking the right questions. And that's what terrifies the establishment. Because questions force reflection. Questions challenge comfort. Questions ignite movements. Now, let's talk about fear. Make no mistake, the rise of Traoré and the fall of traditional Western influence in the Sahel has alarmed global powers. But it's not fear of war. It's fear of an idea. The idea that Africa can stand on its own. That it can reject aid dependency. That it can control its own minerals, its own media, its own military. That it can say no to Paris, to Washington, to Brussels, and survive. This is why countries like Nigeria, tethered to IMF programs and international partnerships, feel the need to push back. Because if Burkina Faso succeeds, it sets a precedent. A dangerous one. That you don't need permission to be free. That you don't need validation to lead. That Africa's children can think and act for themselves. And that's what Ibrahim Traoré represents. So what comes next? Will Tinubu double down on his critique? Will ECOWAS impose further sanctions on the Sahel states? Or will the tide shift? Will we see other nations begin to re-evaluate their alliances? Will Pan-Africanism, once a dream whispered in universities, become the dominant ideology of the next generation? Already, whispers are growing. In Cameroon, whispers. In Zimbabwe, whispers. In Congo, whispers. Traoré's voice is louder than Burkina Faso's borders. And whether you love him or hate him, you cannot ignore him. As he said in that now famous speech, "I do not need to be accepted by old institutions. I only need to be understood by the people I serve." And when the people rise, no institution can stop them. That is not just a warning. It is a prophecy. And from the rooftops of Lagos to the markets of Bamako, from the universities of Nairobi to the deserts of Agadez, that prophecy is spreading. Africa is not a child needing guidance. Africa is a mother rising. And her sons, like Ibrahim Traoré, are no longer whispering. They are roaring. Thank you for watching African Legacy. If this message stirred something in you, share it. Let the world know that a new chapter is being written not by presidents in suits, but by patriots in boots. Subscribe. Stand up. And stay awake. The legacy continues.